So, about a week ago, I was scrolling through Netflix looking for something new to watch. And of course, Netflix knows that I like to watch the same shows over and over again, so I always get the same recommendations. And I was scrolling, and suddenly I was hit with the urge to rewatch Squid Game. Now I'm sitting here thinking, I enjoyed the show quite a bit way back when, and it has been a while. I can't quite remember everything. So why not? Let's just give it another go. And now after I finished my binge, I gotta say, I had a substantially different experience watching the show a second time. I figured I'd take the time to make a retrospective video, as I have a lot of thoughts to share about the show. And now that Squid Game Season 2 is on the way, I figured I'd get this video out as soon as possible before it's too late. So let's get into it. So, I'm sure everyone remembers what it was like back in early 2021 when Squid Game was released. Squid Game was everywhere. It was unavoidable. TikTok edits were rampant, the honeycomb challenge was trending, the cast had a surge in new followers, and Halloween was, well, exactly what you'd expect. The show took over the world. According to Slozman of CNET, Squid Game has been streamed for around 1.65 billion hours, being Netflix's most streamed and most successful show, with only one season, topping the likes of Stranger Things, which has 4 incredibly well-received and successful seasons. The show was a worldwide hit, and has been renewed for a second season coming soon. So what made Squid Game so compelling, and why did it take over the world in such a way? Well, I believe it was a result of a few things. Number 1, Squid Game's premise. The premise of Squid Game is simple, pitting hundreds of players against each other in a battle royale style event of games and challenges to the death. This is a concept very familiar to audiences worldwide, with pieces of fiction such as the Japanese film Battle Royale or the Western novels The Hunger Games, along with their respective adaptations to film. This premise has already been proven to be a type of story that works and is something audiences are familiar with and therefore more inclined to watch. But it's when we get to reason number 2 where things get a little more interesting, and where Squid Game stands out from its creative counterparts. Number 2, the combination of childhood and horror. Squid Game's premise is elevated by having the challenges stem from childhood games. And on top of this, the set design and costume design of Squid Game complements this common theme of childhood. The sets and costumes are bright and colourful. Nice, happy, pastel colours usually associated with safety and home, which are then contrasted against the violence and bloodshed of the games. It has become somewhat of a trend to mix imagery associated with childhood against horror in a lot of modern fiction, I've found. Just look at something like Five Nights at Freddy's, or Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, or even Annabelle in the Conjuring series. All pieces of fiction that use imagery of childhood contrasted against images of horror and terror. It's an effective strategy to evoke fear or suspense in an audience because of the harsh, contrasting images. It's the perfect juxtaposition. There's a reason all of these different series are successful while being so vastly different. There's something about childlike imagery that, when placed against something scary, just elevates the horror to another level. And even again, just on the top of my head, Poppy's Playtime has blown up in the past few years as a new sort of horror indie game that also, like Five Nights at Freddy's, contrasts childlike whimsy with terror. Maybe it has something to do with our association with childhood being traditionally safe, warm, and happy, which these pieces of fiction now challenge and instead substitute with something much more darker and sinister, kind of playing with your nostalgia. But I think that quite possibly the most important reason why Squid Game is so internationally successful is reason number 3, financial and economic struggle. Now that might sound weird, but all of the characters in Squid Game struggle from their economic status, right? They struggle against society and the prejudice they are faced with due to their economic status. This is a universally relatable struggle. No matter who you are or where you are from, economic troubles will probably resonate with you, and anyone can empathize with characters like these. Who wouldn't want to win the prize money of Squid Game? No one would turn that prize down, but the real question is, would you sacrifice your life or the lives around you to get it? That is what makes Squid Game such a compelling story. I often look at other Korean stories that break the international barrier into the Western mainstream of cinema to understand what makes them popular amongst the West. And I've come to somewhat of a realization. Some Korean films that have broken the Western barrier, which I'm familiar with, are both Parasite and Train to Busan, both incredible films with awesome characters and stories. But what do these three projects have in common? Well, they all share themes of economic status. Parasite revolves around Ki-woo's poor and struggling family creeping and scamming their way into a rich household, essentially leeching off of them like a parasite for their own financial gain, while the rich family leech off society, much like a parasite, for their own financial gain. Now, Train to Busan deals with themes of economic status a little differently, having the protagonist be a wealthy man who is separated from his family and who actively neglects his daughter in favor of his work. The film follows his journey as he learns to appreciate his daughter and become a father and become less invested in material wealth in favor of people and their lives. Squid Game, Parasite, and Train to Busan all share a common theme of financial or economic struggle, and I believe this is the key as to why these narratives have broken that international barrier and have become more worldwide phenomena. Now let's move our focus onto Squid Game, shall we? And talk about some of what the show does right, and why it's all because of the characters. So now I'd like to appreciate the positive aspects of the show and take some time to praise its writing, commentary, and performances that really work. And of course, I'm referring to the Korean dub. I don't think anyone should really watch this dubbed. It's just wrong.
I need you. Old man, can't you see that?
Get up! God, this bitch so pathetic. Stop calling me babe and old man, huh?
But I'll also be examining whether these aspects held up upon a second viewing, and I'll address how my views may have changed over time. So firstly, the writing in Squid Game, for the most part, more on that later, is very solid. This is especially true in the earlier episodes, with the highlight for me being episode 1 itself. The mystery built around the games during this episode is at its best here. The reveal of the first player being eliminated in red light green light still to this day is one of the best moments of the show, I feel. The first real turning point where the previous scenes have been recontextualized completely, and they're much more sinister than we previously expected. I've heard a lot of criticism over time surrounding episode 2 of the show, how it stunts the pace of the story and has no place in the plot, but I feel strongly against this fact. While it is an episode with a much slower pace than others, it is key to establishing the relationships between characters we will see much more of later, and is crucial in establishing the motivations of the other main characters beside Gi-hun. Firstly, the episode pulls one of the most interesting twists I've seen from modern television. It plays with our expectations of how the games will go by actually having the players vote not to participate in continuing the Squid Game. I think this is one of the best and most interesting moments in the show for me. Despite having no immediate threat of death, it's like one of the most tense scenes in the show, because we know how much is at stake with the voting. And through using this democratic system with such a large player base, you, the viewer, and Gi-hun both feel kind of helpless about the outcome, as he has such little control over it. Not only this, but the climax of the vote ending with player 1, who was just established to be suffering from dementia, who holds the deciding vote, is beyond suspenseful. I think the subversion of our expectations through the vote's outcome was a great tool to foreshadow some more twists to come for the series, for better and for worse. I think the idea that not only do the soldiers running the games allow for a vote, but even the fact that they uphold their end of the deal by letting the contestants actually go, it speaks volumes to their goals and adds depth to the organization behind the games. I remember when watching the show for the first time, it was truly an interesting moment in episode 2 because their honesty and honorability to the rules adds so much more depth to the organization's beliefs, than just being, a mindless murder game show just for the sake of it. If the people running the games truly didn't care about their alleged goal to give the players a fair and unbiased chance, unlike society, they would force the players to keep playing against their will for the VIP's entertainment. But the fact they're willing to sacrifice the games to uphold their values is what I think separates Squid Games from other pieces of fiction that employ this same battle royale premise. Through this episode, we learn important character dynamics such as Sungwoo and Ali, as well as Ilnam and Gi-hun. Sae-byuk also has an important role in this episode too, establishing her North Korean origins. On top of her relationship with her younger brother and her mother, who is stuck in North Korea, her origins further cement her role as an outsider even amongst the other contestants of the Squid Game, which is a collection of quite possibly the most prejudiced and oppressed people of Korea, showing us how even amongst the minority of the country, she is still an outsider. This is key in understanding her relationship with Gi-hun, which has a natural evolution over time from this petty rivalry to an unbreakable bond, leading to one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the entire show. I have to say to those who critique this second episode, which many of those exact people would praise episode 6, the Marble episode, for its heartbreaking and tearjerker moments, could you honestly say that the Marble episode would be just as emotionally impactful as it is if it weren't for the strong character development handled in episode 2? I feel the only reason we care so much for all these characters is because the show actually took the time to show us them all at their best and their worst, so we could empathize and care for their struggles as soon as possible. Right, I think I've made my case. I've spent a lot of time examining the show's positive aspects, and there's a lot to appreciate, but now I want to move on to something a little more negative. I've already alluded to it a couple times in this video, but I will of course be talking about the plot twists that the show pulls off in later episodes, and I'll be mainly focusing on one in particular that really grinds my gears. So let's just get into it, shall we? Right, the infamous plot twist I am referring to is, of course, last chance to skip spoilers if you haven't seen the show. 3, 2, 1. The reveal that Il-nam, also known as Player 1, is actually the head of the Squid Games. Dun dun dun. What? Now, upon viewing the show for the first time over a year ago when it first came out, Il-nam was actually my favourite character in the whole show, and I found the Marble episode was a key standout as a brilliant end to the duo character dynamics we've seen up till this point, with the highlight for me being Il-nam and Gi-hun. So in case you forgot, the episode plays out with the two needing to compete against each other in a game of marbles, a 50-50 guessing game basically to determine who lives or dies, the goal of which to steal all of the opponent's marbles and end with 20 in total. The game begins and Il-nam starts having flashbacks of his childhood and his dementia starts clouding his judgment at the worst possible time. Eventually Gi-hun convinces Player 1 to compete in the game with him, but unfortunately for Gi-hun, Player 1 is an absolute giga chad at marbles. It gets to the point where Gi-hun loses all of his marbles, but at the last second, this happens.
헐. 헐. 뭐라고 했지? 예? 방금 뭐라고 했냐고? Sir.
The moment where Gi-hun passes the threshold and officially sacrifices his precious morals in exchange for survival. A terribly heartbreaking moment, truly. And after Gi-hun lies and cheats his way to 19 marbles, the old man proposes that Gi-hun bet all 19 of his marbles against Il-nam's 1. Gi-hun is understandably upset, but then Il-nam says this.
말이 안 되는 거잖아. 그럼 자네가 날 속이고 내 굿을 가져간 건 말이 되고?
It turns out that Ilnam faked his dementia outburst and felt bad for winning the game, letting Gi-hun take advantage of him to win. This moment right here is one of the best in the entire show. I believe in manipulating the old man, Gi-hun was heading down a path of selfishness and self-destruction, just as Sung-woo did. But the old man saves him from this path by forcing Gi-hun to reflect on his selfish actions. I personally believe that this is the major turning point in Gi-hun's character arc where, from here on out, he without a doubt values lives above everything else. We see him angered at Sung-woo for sacrificing the glass manufacturer in the Stepping Stones game. We see him propose an alliance with Sae-byuk, vowing that they will both live and escape the games together. And we see Gi-hun choose to end the games, offering to forfeit his victory and the 4.6 billion won prize just to save Sung-woo. If Ilnam hadn't made Gi-hun reflect on his selfishness in episode 6, I don't think the show would have turned out the way it did. And I believe Sung-woo would have beaten Gi-hun if it weren't for this. So why am I telling you this? What does this have to do with the plot twist in the finale? Well, as I said before, Ilnam used to be my favourite character, and this is why. He shows the compassion in Gi-hun. They bring the best out of each other. But now, after knowing that he's behind the games and manipulating them from within, this moment has lost all of its weight. Now all I see is a man manipulating someone who cares about him, and who he seemingly cares about too. A man toying with his emotions and threatening him with death, just to teach him a lesson about compassion? It doesn't really make any sense. A plot twist should recontextualize previous scenes and elevate them beyond past their perceived original purpose. While this twist does recontextualize the rest of the show before it, it makes those scenes worse upon a second viewing. Because now we have no reason to side with Ilnam at all. He's a lying cheat who is manipulating a caring man for no other reason than for his own little science experiment. And that's the worst thing a plot twist can be. This plot twist also contradicts some of the previous information we are told in the show, and important information at that as well, mind you. So essentially the purpose of the Squid Games is to give everyone an equal opportunity, right? These people who participate in the games have faced incredible prejudice throughout their lives and are dealt the worst hand society could give them. The values of the people running the Squid Games is to eliminate that factor by giving everyone an equal and unbiased chance at the money. These values are perfectly summarized by the frontman in episode 5 when he says this.
너희들이 시체에서 장기를 떼어내서 팔든 장기를 통째로 씹어먹든 난 관심이 없어. 하지만 너희들은 이곳에서 가장 중요한 걸 망쳐놨어. 평등이야.
Now, I love this scene. I think it adds depth to the Squid Games and the people running it, giving them a clear and understandable values and motivations as to why they believe in their own messed up way, why the Squid Games are benefiting society. But now, after the Ilnam twist, it becomes clear that this is just a bunch of lies. Ilnam's presence actively shifts the other players' chances of survival exponentially. Ilnam knows each of the games before they happen, which is crucial information which they killed the Doctor for. He knows the optimal strategy to win at Tug of War and ensures his team's victory, and he ended the nighttime rule by ordering the frontman to end the games. Before the twist, this scene seemed to show that despite the frontman's appearance, he feels slightly empathetic, especially towards the old man, but now after the twist, it's clear he's just following orders. There's no complexity in his actions anymore. It's quite sad that almost every scene featuring Ilnam in the show now is basically ruined because he's just lying all the time. I'd say the only scene that somewhat isn't impacted by the twist is the voting scene, because knowing Ilnam runs the games, yet despite this he lets everyone go still, it is an interesting character moment, but one scene isn't enough to make the twist worth it. I have to say, in the scene where Ilnam is killed off screen, it was somewhat suspicious, especially considering every other character death you basically explicitly see them die, but I just kind of blew it off and assumed they were just being tasteful about it. After all, it was a very emotionally impactful scene, and seeing him dead I think would have just made it worse or less effective. And I considered for a second that maybe he would have survived, but I kind of just wrote it off as a dumb idea because I believed, they'll never do that, that would just be stupid, but they did. I remember when watching the show for the first time, and when I saw the old man alive on the bed in the finale, I initially felt kind of excited and relieved. I thought, wow, my favorite character survived? What? How? I have so many questions. But something felt wrong. I knew it wasn't quite right, and when he explained that he was behind the games, I almost didn't want to believe it, because I knew how ridiculous that would be of a twist, and how much of the show it would just ruin. I couldn't believe they would even try it. After finishing the show, I was talking to some friends about it, and the twist came up in conversation. I told him, oh man, I did not see that twist coming, but only because of how ridiculous it was, and he told me, oh, I thought it was obvious. I genuinely thought he was taking the piss, but he said, oh, because you see the old man's hands in the VIP episode, after he's supposed to have died, when he puts his, helmet on. I couldn't believe it, even then. I couldn't believe anyone would have been able to predict such a ludicrous and ridiculous plot twist. It is so ungodly bad, it made the show substantially worse upon a second viewing. No plot twist should ever function this way. It's probably up there as just one of the worst plot twists I've ever seen. It's literally almost as bad as just saying, "I was all a dream, ooh." Okay, maybe that's a little too harsh, but it's not that bad, I guess, but it isn't good. Alright, whatever. Enough of this. On to the conclusion. So, I know I've seemed to express a feeling of ambivalence towards this show in this video, and it's true, I do find parts of this show to be both clever, interesting, and compelling, while other parts being confusing, missed opportunities. But did I enjoy my second viewing of Squid Game? Yes, while the Ilnam plot twist did make the experience much less enjoyable upon a second viewing, the show does have way more good things about it than bad. I especially found the police brother plot twist more interesting upon a second viewing for some reason. I just wish it hadn't ended in such a poor way. Hopefully they retcon the police brother's death in season 2, because I would actually love to see him come back, because it feels like his story isn't quite over yet. I find basically every other character in the show is well developed and compelling, and the premise, while silly, is still great. I think if you enjoyed the show over a year ago, then maybe give it another go before season 2, but if you've seen the show before and really wasn't that interested, I can tell you, you likely won't change your mind upon seeing it a second time. But enough from me, now I want to hear from you. Tell me your feelings about Squid Game in the comments. Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Did you like the Ilnam twist? Tell me why, I want to hear your thoughts. Just remember, keep it civil. And as always, thanks for watching. I truly appreciate each and every one of you for the support, and I will catch you in the next one. See ya.